All right, what is going on, everybody? It is the Parallax viewer with the Big Signorelli, aka Big Sig, Siggy Stardust, Signacious Crumb, Dirk Sigler. Just kidding. No, I'm really excited to have this special guest on today. We've been in correspondence with trying to do an interview for quite some time, and someone who I consider not only a good colleague and friend, but also someone who is like a mentor who's taught me a lot about Lacan, and I participated in all of his groups. It is the infamous Samuel McCormick, who is a professor at San Francisco State University in communication studies, but most of you know him as Lectures on Lacan, an open cartel enclave regarding the studies of Lacanian psychoanalysis. I mean, he not only does lectures on YouTube and Substack and publishes small articles, he also has open um, cartels where he goes over the seminars one by one. I've attended seminars 17, 18, 19, all the way through 20, and learned a lot. It's just a great universe of just discussion and going through the it's like going through the hell of Dante without Virgil, but we're all trying to just understand it ourselves. So thank you, Sam, for coming on board, and the floor is yours if you want to give some comments or concerns before we get into it.
Well, thanks for that amazing introduction. I don't know that I've ever heard an introduction quite so good, but mainly it's because of the Dante reference. Because you lectures on Lacan, you were like it's a cartel enclave, and I was like that's great. What a wild description. I love this. And then I realized when you brought up Dante's Inferno, I was imagining that lectures on Lacan is like somewhere between Satan's ass crack and the rest of Satan's anatomy. That might be the enclave in question, is like right there, right next to Satan's ass crack, somewhere in Dante's Inferno. This is like the lost book. This, you know what this is? This is uh, lectures on Lacan is the devil's tramp stamp. It's a lower. We're just a lower back tattoo on Satan that was left out from Dante's Inferno.
I
That's
was gonna
the
be more crude than that, but
I love this. No, that's where you were going. You said it. Hey, I'm just taking notes here. That's totally rad. I'm happy to be here and happy to talk with you, Andrew, about whatever you want to talk about. Not least of which are all the S1s by which you go. Big Daddy Sig, Sig Daddy Dust, Ziggy Zoo Watt, Woo Woo and Hoo Hoo, and
it's just all along. It's just all metonymic association.
you're just flitting from one Sig to the next. I get it. And I love it. I'm really happy that you invited me to hang out and talk for a little while. I know you're busy, so I'll just kick it right back to you and say, whatever you want to talk about, and if I can help, I'm always happy to help. And that's always been the vibe with lectures on Lacan, is we're just curious and we just work through stuff, and everybody brings something to the table. It's a pretty damn good time as a result. And you've been there from the start. So I'm really honored and really appreciate the invitation to come out here and support you and your work if I can.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, nobody's really out there like really not only doing the work that you're doing, but also just questioning and like getting rid of like all the dogmatism and just like this sort of buffoonery of like, well, maybe Lacan is uncertain. I think no, I think there is a way to read him and get at to some crumbs, as he likes to say.
I love that you've put it this way. I mean, you get him working the crumbs. Maybe you're referring to the first bit of Lettourdie when he refers back to Kierkegaard's philosophical crumbs, which we get into English as philosophical fragments. I love this as a riff for him. I love this idea of crumbs. I also think that I've never understood this. Like, yes, Lacan is difficult. He's a very squirrely thinker, but all it really takes to understand Lacan is to stop reading secondary scholarship and just read Lacan. Just study Lacan. And if you've got French, great. If you can read facing pages where you've got French and English, great. But I think part of the dilemma is that rather than doing the work of reading the primary source, everybody seems to be like orbiting these secondary scholars. And that's what we are. We are secondary. But the work of understanding Lacan, I just never understood. It's really not that difficult. What's difficult is ignoring all the noise and going straight for the signal that is Lacan's own work. And I wouldn't say like, don't start with Icree, because that's fucking rough. That's rough on anybody to start there. There are some pieces you could start with there, but I would suggest the seminars, because when you just sit down and start reading these things, like remember when you and your buddy were chopping up like the early seminars, seminars 1, 2, and 3, you guys just like sat down and did one simple fucking thing. You read them. And voila, look at the magic that happens when you just do the work. And I could say the same thing about Hegel. I would say the same thing about Kierkegaard. I don't know if I'd say the same thing about Aristotle or the Bible, because there the secondary scholarship I think is really excellent. Um, but Lacan is one of those thinkers where it behooves us to just get in there. Walter Benjamin is another one. Benjamin's work makes a lot of sense when you just sit down and read him and stop listening to all the lit crit freaks on the sidelines. Because half those people don't know the difference between their intellectual ass and a hole in the wall. Unfortunately, I mean, I hate to say it, but that's true. Most of us have no fucking idea what we're doing. But to do the work of simply reading Lacan, I got news for you. That's what it means to be a Lacanian. And it's precisely the reason why Lacan always said he was a Freudian. Lacan was not a Lacanian, he was a Freudian. Why? Because all he ever said he was doing was just reading Freud. And I love that as an image because what it does is it takes all the fancy motherfuckers with their $20 words and all their correct French pronunciation and it sidelines that shit. The winners in the Lacanian world are not the geniuses with 3 to 5 languages. It is simply those who do the hard work. The grind set is what produces a good Lacanian. You got to sit down and just grind with him. And there are ways to make that fun. And that's what Lectures on Lacan is all about. We grind and we have fun. So I think that that is something that I've always admired about you and your work with the seminars is you're one of these folks that never hesitates to just sit down and do the fucking work. And maybe that's your military stuff, or maybe it's like your religiosity stuff coming in, but I think you have a good discipline around just doing the work. And that stamina that comes with discipline, because that's what you can do. You can train your body to have stamina, right? As you know, probably better than any Lacanian on earth, you know this. You can train your body to do that hard work, to have that grind set and get the job done. And I really admire you for doing that. And I hope you're a role model as you age up for the other young Turks out there. It's just about doing the work. And what I mean by that, final word from me, and then I'll shut up. I'll get off this soapbox here, but like it means shut the fuck up and get back to the book. So I like what we're doing. I appreciate all the posts and I love receiving emails and I like recording and sharing all this stuff. It's a real honor, probably the honor of my career, I'd say. But at the same time, I think that we as Lacanians, if we can say that, would be better off if half of us just shut the fuck up and got back to doing the work. So, conferences are important. Attending lectures are important. Recording lectures and doing teaching sessions, doing stuff like what we're doing right now, it is important because somebody is going to be tuning in and intrigued by similar topics and may find something, just a morsel, just a crumb, a fragment that they want to take from this. So it's always worth doing it, but never as much as it's worth just putting your nose to the grindstone. And so I always offer that as an important footnote to getting involved in Lacan, is that the difference between making sense of this shit or not is not whether you have the brain power, it's whether you have the willpower. And let me just be really clear about this. Willpower is not desire. Desire is a skillet without sides. You put that shit on a burner, crack an egg on it, and the egg sizzles really quickly, really hot on the pan of desire, and then slides off into the fire. You feel me? Willpower is the ability to put sides on a skillet so that the egg stays there and keeps cooking. Now, I'm not saying you should be cooking your eggs for that long. You ruin some fucking eggs. But the idea is that desire burns hot but has no sides. Willpower is the side of the skillet, not the thing that burns the hottest, but the part that keeps it all together. And that's what I mean by having this willpower. It's not about brain power and it ain't about desire. It's about, I think, willpower and the ability to just stay organized, focused, and consistent. And that's the secret to success. I mean, I'm living proof of that. I ain't no fucking genius. I'm just somebody who has a solid grind set.
I think in that exposition you just gave a better TED talk on grit than even grit people and grit bros could do. But
Are there such a thing as grit bros? Is that a thing?
I guess so. It's like maybe there's just the corporate success, self-help gurus, all that.
Get to it. Keep working. The grit bros. You know, like for everything, there is a bro.
There is a bro, and I think that's what reading Lacan on his own got me, you know, able to like illusion myself from the fantasy that there's like an all-knowing sort of academic or person, and that comes with all the people that read secondary stuff, and hence you get bros from that. And I
Yeah.
think I couldn't help but think of, before we get into the talk, I just want to say this, it made me think of something that Bruce Lee says, and I want to make like the rendition of Bruce Lee's to like Lacanian. It's like Bruce Lee says, "I fear not the man who trains 1,000 kicks one time, but I fear the man who trains one kick 1,000 times. I fear not
Yeah.
the academic who's read 1,000 thinkers one time, but one who reads one thinker 1,000 times." And I feel,
That's great.
you know,
I love that sense. First of all, like I'm the kind of person who loves that sensibility. My entire career has been spent working one at a time. I mean, my training is actually in intellectual and cultural history. History of Western thought is kind of like what I grew up on. But I grew up taking them one at a time. And you work it, but only until the interest dries up. That's another important part in all this. In all of the times, I mean, I've done lectures on Lacan with Heidegger, with Kierkegaard, with Kant, with Seneca. I mean, I've done it with all these other thinkers. This is just the only one that people seem really intrigued about. It's the only, actually, the lectures on Lacan are the only ones where people started showing up and recording them. That was the difference. Like I did a whole series on Deleuze. I was just teaching classes. But when we got to Lacan, people started showing up and recording the damn things. That's how we got lectures on Lacan. I was like, what do you mean? Somebody wants to fucking replay this? I thought it was just for my students so they could keep up and be ready for the next class. But for whatever reason, Lacan is one of those thinkers that has an audience that is interested in this kind of stuff. So, but the mindset you describe from Bruce Lee is great because once you rehearse one kick 1,000 times, then you're ready for the second kick and another 1,000 times. And over time, you accumulate an entire arsenal. You know what I mean? Where it's fucking habit. You are just habituated to move in certain ways. And I think reading Lacan is like that too, is that you kind of get in the rhythm with him. Like for instance, you learn that at the front and back end of any of his lessons, that's usually where the good shit is. I personally love it from behind. I like the back end because it's there that Lacan realizes he's out of time. Consistently, he runs out of time at the end of these lessons. The seminars are collections of little lessons, little lectures that he gives. And then he tries to just cut to the chase. And so a lot of the fancy footwork, because that's where he thinks is with his feet, a lot of the fancy footwork that happens in the middle of a lesson, you can kind of like fucking ignore some of that and wait for the end, especially when he's on a time crunch. Because then he's like, okay, we're out of time. So let me just tell you what the fuck it is I'm trying to say. It's great. The intros, though, are really nice too, because usually an intro to a Lacan lesson is him compensating for what he perceives as the shortcomings of the previous lesson. So he'll usually show up and kind of like, it's a good teacherly move, summarize what it is he was trying to say last time. And so you get a kind of strange circuitry reading Lacan. So you learn about a lesson at the end, and then you learn about the previous lesson at the beginning of the other. And I think that's a really important thing. That's why I think also that it's good to talk with you about this, because I know you also really got roped into the logical time essay. I know that for you, that was a biggie where you were like, you were cutting some fucking teeth on that essay, more than I've seen a lot of people do. So I know that that essay, the Purloined Letter too, but that logical time essay was one that I know you were really working hard on. And I love that because you really see Lacan at his fluid best, which is when he's thinking, he thinks in odd rhythms, strange time patterns. And that's partly why you get various like basic diagrams, like the elemental graph that gives us eventually the graph of desire. There's always that retroactive element. And so you get things happening all at once. And initially, this is what structure is for Lacan. Structure is a place where things happen all at once. So language is a structure because in order to talk about a plant, for instance, you've got to have all this other shit popping in the background. And it's all happening in a kind of bizarre here and now. And I love that about him when it comes to structure, that you do get this sense that it's an all at once. There's a lot happening at the very same time. And so it's helpful to understand Lacan, I think, by pulling out the elements and taking them one at a time. But ultimately, you run into this barrier where, in order to truly make sense of what he's doing, you have to see how all of those elements are operating at the same time.
Mhm.
So, for instance, the basic structure of discourse for Lacan, this four-footed animal where you have an agent addressing an other, and then you've got something produced as a result of that addressivity, all atop which a certain truth that structures the agent's ability to speak. This whole thing that is a Lacanian structure of discourse, you got all these vectors pointing in different directions. And it gives you the sense, and it's helpful to think that you actually do have a flow of sorts through this. Um, but I think to truly make sense of what he's doing with discourse as a structure is you have to think all of these elements at precisely the same time.
Absolutely. And
That's crucial.
this is where I really want to drive the conversation because one, uh going back to canceling out all the noise and focusing on the single thinker rather than all the secondary thing, I think
Mm,
even is an issue that Lacan has not only with himself but the university.
mm.
For quite a long time and his problems with the institution, the IPA. It gets really highlighted in Seminar 16 in the beginning when he talks about this idea of publication or
Ah,
replication, that
yeah,
we're the detritus in the trash, but isn't that
yeah.
where the analyst is? And he separates himself.
Eventually, yeah.
Yeah, he separates
Eventually, the
himself.
analyst becomes something thrown away.
Yeah, he separates himself from structuralism because for him, and this will get into what you had just brought up for the conversation, two things. Uh that his structure is not structuralism. Structure for him is the most real because it converges towards its own impossibility. And two, that
Hmm.
his structure or the structure that he is talking about for psychoanalysis um, aims at the cause of its own discourse. And this is oriented around the intro of what he writes on the board in Seminar 16 that the essence of psychoanalytic theory or psychoanalytic theory is a discourse without speech or words. So
Hmm.
can you unpack that? Even you just introduced the master's discourse, I believe. But yeah, break that down in
Hmm.
the thought emotion of Lacan when he starts to get into the topology of structure.
Well, we'll have to come back to the second part because I'm going to want to hear you say that last part again about what he's writing on the board.
Yeah, he
Um,
writes he writes on the board that the essence of psychoanalytic theory is a discourse without speech.
mhm,
Mhm. And obviously like I've been studying this like seminar for quite some time now. So
mhm,
like I have an idea, but obviously there's the historical background to it. There is a political maneuver because of the failure of May 68. the speech of the students protesting were muffling
Mhm.
the demands. The desire evoked in speech by the students were covering and repressing the demands, even censoring the demands of the workers who were trying to fight for fair
Go
wages,
figure.
right?
Yeah.
So, and you have the difference between demand and desire, muffled and even censored by the speech act of the protesters. And this is like so nuanced to why he's like, what you want is a master, you'll get one, and why he was so
Mhm.
ambivalent of the May 68 protesters. He even goes so far as to call an interlocutor or a polemicized the interlocutor Lucien Goldman, who is a French Marxist. He calls him by the name of Mudger Muddle.
Ah,
Yeah, because he says his words are like mud that slide off the ears of the people.
now, hey, don't you adopt that as one of your signifiers. That better not become your next episode. Don't you fucking do that, man. I'll type a comment. All right, so all right, dude, that helps a lot. So let me see if we can talk through a little bit. The 2 points that you're making, they're actually quite related, if you ask me. You said structure, and you called it the most real thing, I think, something like this. And I see what you're getting at. So structure for Lacan equals language. Language for him and structure become exchangeable terms after these seminars. So up into the early 70s, he suddenly just like fucking language is structure, structure is language. But its relation to the real that you queue up is a really important part in all this because language, and if you want to zoom out a little more and call it the symbolic or structure, you're right. Structure for Lacan is always verging toward or structured around a certain impossibility. This for him is what structure means, is that there's always an open end or a hole or something kind of leaking out of structure. And good theory for him is theory that walks right up to the edge of that crack from which things leak, that hole that can't be plugged, that impossible void around which a structure is built. This is really clutch because it gives you a good sense of what Lacan means by a matheme. A math a matheme for Lacan is a structure that is written, built up around a certain impasse, a certain impossibility. And impossibility for him is not the same as the real. It's a signal of the real. Impossibility is what it feels like when you encounter a bit of the real. You encounter an impossibility. Something doesn't work, something no longer functions. And you're like, fuck, what is that? And his point is, that's a little bit of the real. And so in 1974, for instance, Lacan will say this is what the symptom is. The symptom is an extension of the real, and it's the part of you and your life that's not working out. It's not working. And now you can hear how he's going to get to the sexual non-rapport, right? Because this is what's not working out. That's what's up between. That's what sexuation is all about. It's about formulating that which is not working out. And you might even say that this for Lacan is what makes psychoanalysis a practice. Because as a clinical therapeutic technique, it's about helping people come to terms with what's not working. So Lacan traces the symptom back to the speaking body back to a field of unconscious truth. And the unconscious truth for him always has a bit of the real in it, in a field of impossibility, in a moment of impotence that structures unconscious truth. And we can talk through all of that. But for Lacan, what really matters here is how can you write, theorize, and talk about structure in a way that preserves a certain impossibility within it, that causes structure to kind of collapse on itself, to turn in on itself, and the like. This, for him, is precisely the job of psychoanalytic theory. I think he becomes really clear about this in Seminar 18. I think Seminar 18 is where he really gets the sense that what we do as psychoanalytic theorists is we write. And the littoral zone in Seminar 18 becomes like the sand in which we're always towing the line, in which we're always writing things out, in which we're constantly leaving traces. There's your publication, there's your trash. Writing is a series of little marks left here and there, often in the sand, sometimes just destined for the wastebasket. Now, this sounds all over the place, but it's actually a very good lead in to that quote you bring up. Discourse without speech being the essence of psychoanalytic theory. Something along these lines. I don't remember the exact passage. I'll trust that you're saying it correctly, but that makes a lot of sense because for Lacan, psychoanalytic theory, it is something we talk about, but it is something we only do in writing. In other words, without speech. That's what I think he's getting at here. Psychoanalytic theory is a written discourse. And now you can start hearing how he's edging towards mathematics. Mathematics for Lacan is still within the field of language, but it marks the inner limit of the linguistic enterprise because you're no longer dealing with meanings. Signifieds, gone. You're no longer dealing with signifiers when you're talking mathematically. Signifiers, words, gone. You're not even dealing with alphabetic letters anymore when you're fucking with mathematics. In mathematics, the letter is not an alphabetic symbol, it's a variable for which to solve. And now you see what's going on here is we've shed meaning, we've shed signifiers, we've even dropped the letter. Even the letter now becomes litter, right? Fuck the letter. Ultimately, you fuck the letter. What we're looking at are meaningless written symbols that can be plugged into, he's always very dismissive about his equations, into these tiny formulas, as he often puts it, these little scribblings, but it's all about writing. Fundamentally, this is how he gets to topology at the level of knot theory. It's not by way of tying knots in with a string or a rope. It's by way of drawing knots. The Borromean knot for Lacan is first and foremost an image on the board that gives the illusion of three-dimensionality. And that's crucial. That's the centerpiece of the entire introduction into these three rings, as it were. There ain't no rings up there. There are 6 strokes of the chalk that produce a Borromean knot. There aren't rings up there. There are 6 marks of chalk that provide the illusion of 3 rings overlapping and blah, blah, blah. That for him is just strokes of the pen. So mathematics is great for Lacan, he thinks, because you find language at its furthest limit where suddenly you're just dealing with the little scribbles. It kind of reminds me of the very origin of writing in the West. People have debated this for a long time, but I think the origin of writing is a bunch of fucking drunk Greeks who are sitting on the river on the shore and watching Phoenician ships go sailing by. And the Phoenicians had writing. And what the Greeks were doing is they would look at the meaningless written symbols, the scribbles and the scrabbles on the sides of the Phoenician like cargo or on the vessel or something like this. And they would just be like, yo, that symbol looks cool. And that would become their symbol. And so then at drinking parties and stuff, where it's like, who could give the best speech, I don't know, on love, the winner would get some kind of a fucking trophy, which was originally a wine thing that you could drink out of, right? The Gatorade pitcher that's thrown over the coach is the last vestige of that, right? The trophy, though, you'll note you could fill that shit with champagne and then drink from it. That's an old, like, Grecian tradition. Winner of the speech contest got to put their name on the trophy, but they didn't have a way to write their name. What they had were some cool ass tags that they saw on the side of a Phoenician ship. And so it was like, that fucking written symbol doesn't mean anything to me, but it looks fire. So I'm going to take that as my written symbol. And now suddenly you've got the origin of writing.
That's such
All
a
Lacan
good
is doing with
thing.
mathematics is bringing us back to that point, the nascency of writing, where it's about the stroke, the
Mhm.
indentation of a pen on page. That for him is as far as you can go with mathematics. Those indentations are best done in a way that writes a certain impossibility. So For instance, I've got signifiers up here for Lacan's discourse. You know, we could have four little symbols moving through this thing in 100 different ways. Really not that many, only a few. But this element that I draw as a delta, actually it shouldn't be there at all. Lacan's theory of discourse is structured around this space where there is no vector. It simultaneously inaugurates and writes this impossibility and gives us a chance to talk about it. So when Lacan says that psychoanalytic theory is a discourse without speech, he means that it's done in writing, pure writing. This is what we learned from Seminar 18. And pure writing at the level of the matheme, which he borrows from mathematics because it traffics in meaningless written symbols at the edge of language, provokes true saying. That's the switch here. Mathematics for Lacan is a written enterprise. So is psychoanalytic theory. But when it's done right, it provokes discussion. We start talking about it. Good writing, pure writing, provokes good talking, true saying. So for Lacan, the two are very closely related. He thinks that a lot of what he's doing in his seminars is adding speech to things that are written out. And that's how he works the board. The chalkboard becomes this place where he provides a written formula or a drawing or a little phrase, a saying of sorts that's been written down that then can be talked about. So I think he sees the entire uh, psychoanalytic inquiry as a process of meaningless formulaic writing in these tiny little equations, he says, that then provoke lots of debate and deliberation. And bro, that could be the very reason why we have this proliferation of dumbass secondary scholarship on Lacan, is that everybody wants to talk about those weird little written symbols. So I think there's a lot that can be said about that, but I
Uh,
know we're short on time, so let's stay focused.
yeah. No, and I like that too because like whether or not Lacan like was a good mathematician is besides the point.
Ah,
I think it's really important that he was able to separate the speech from the writing in the way that like okay, when you look at mathematics like set theory, it is a universe of it wouldn't be discourse, it'd be mathematics, but the homology for Lacan would be the signifier as trying to be a universe of discourse. The set theory notations are a universe of mathematics that would contain variables that represent different types of mathematical theories, try to contain in like the big toe of all math, which becomes impossible because of this the Russell set, right? The set which would contain all sets that do not contain themselves. That's the paradox. That's the impasse. But like for Lacan, it's like, well, it's only a paradox because I could write it there just fine and it works. But as soon as I talk about it, as soon as I discuss it with peers, that's where it becomes a paradox because speech fails at this formalization, which is quite distinct from the formalism that I put onto paper, I put on the board, these etches and
mm,
sketches, right? And I think that's like succinctly what you just pointed out. Specifically, what I'm curious about is in that spot that you said where the vector is, where you have the little delta, it's not supposed to be there, right?
mhm.
There's no vector actually right there, as you
That's
pointed
right.
out. Sorry.
That's right.
Um, and in that formula of the truth, agent, other, and product, right?
Hmm.
Truth, or if we look at it in the side of the master's discourse, the split subject is the condition for, that discourse, and the effect, the product is, the little a. And to me, it seems like what he's pointed out is that there is no vector that would connect cause and effect um, onto the structure that is structured by language. His structure is showing that there is cause and there is effect, but they don't link up, right? What we get is a sort of semblance of some type of unity.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what you get is a semblance of unity. And that's why he's not on board with any universalization, right? That's to turn in, but you know what? I mean, he kind of is, because something of the one is all we're ever dealing with at some level. And what that means is that we're turning things into one. Hence, that's why I always emphasize the etymology of this universe of X, Y, or Z, is that for Lacan, that's the universe is a bad word, but only if you read it the wrong way. The correct way to read it makes it very accurate. It talks about how we turn multiplicities into illusions of singularity. And that's in part what's happening in the master's discourse, is the master wants to pretend, whether they know it or not, and that's really the issue, is that they don't know what they want. That's the dilemma of the master's discourse, is their desire and the fantasy that props it up is completely beyond the master's ability to see. That's what you see in the bottom half of the master's discourse. Look very carefully at that. That is Lacan's formula for fantasy without a lozenge in between. The master doesn't realize that the truth of their ability to speak, barred subjectivity, is constantly in search of a plug that would fill that hole in them. They don't see that the reduction of the other to objet A as an object for surplus enjoyment is precisely the thing that sustains their fantasy. Notice too, if you take the master's discourse and you look at the bottom half of it, you see a master unable to come to terms with their own fantasy. If you take the master's discourse though and you invert it, literally turn that shit upside down, you get the analytic discourse. So the analytic discourse becomes a really important space where masters are confronted with their fantasy. Now notice it's a little reversed. It almost looks like the fantasy of the pervert, little a, lozenge slashed s. But nevertheless, the other side of psychoanalysis is the master's discourse. But the opposite is also true. The other side of the master's discourse is an analytic correction that brings the master to terms with the fantasy that he can't bear. And now, if you've got ears to hear, this is precisely what Lacan's doing with masculinity. Masculine enjoyment is a blind enjoyment. Phallic enjoyment is a blind enjoyment. Because it's built atop this kind of ignorance, profound ignorance, that what I see in you, dear other, is nothing more than a part that I hope can somehow, someday, some way make me feel whole. And now you've got the basic Lacanian formula for exploitation, commodification, reification. I know you're deep into the Marxist and post-Marxist thinking as well. This is how Lacan makes sense of it. This is ultimately what's at stake in surplus enjoyment, is the reduction of one's partner to a pile of parts that I can then consume. The same way a master or bondsman, yeah.
No, that is perfect because I was gonna ask a question regarding the master's discourse because in 15 or in Seminar 17 in page 15, the first chapter, he says that it is the very instance that the S1, which is the signifier of the master's discourse, intervenes on an already constituted field of signifiers. But I think that that term constituted is very dubious because it's not like it's a totality. It's as you pointed out, you know, the insistence upon this fantasy, right, of wholeness or oneness that this signifier tries to plug in a hole, a gap, but there's always a loss, if I'm correct, right? Like, you know, that A is always going to be produced. And so far as we're in the master's discourse, that little A is what can't be contained. It's a remainder that is left out, whether it's in exploitation, whether it's in, you know, the masculine fantasy, or even in knowledge, right? You know, knowledge that everybody, like philosophical knowledge, it can't account for something in its totality, its big toe.
Hmm.
I don't know
I
if
wonder about
you,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
if you're on the same lines of that. This is like stuff that I'm thinking in the sort of mechanisms of that formula, that topology itself. I guess something I could like ask,
For the master's discourse.
yeah, for the master's discourse,
Yeah.
right? Because well, one of the things I wanted to ask, well, two things actually. What is the condition for the quarter turn that would allow not only for us to turn the discourse upside down to get the analytic intervention, but also other discourses like the university and the hysteric one. And
Well, if you give the
that,
master a quarter turn
yeah,
counterclockwise, you get the university. And
exactly.
if you give the master a quarter turn clockwise, you get the hysteric. In order to get the analytic discourse, you got to do a full, basically 2 quarter turns. You got to make it a half turn. You got to turn that motherfucker completely upside down. But that's exactly what's great about that way of thinking is that, and we don't have to be theoretical about this. If you encounter somebody and they are positioning you as the other in a discourse that you perceive to be one of mastery, you can think to yourself, how could I, in this interaction, effect a quarter turn in this discourse? Would it be possible for me to, for instance, hystericize the master? And what you would do in that moment is the very same thing that bread and butter Lacanian psychoanalysts would do as well, is you focus on the barred subjectivity that pops up nevertheless in this field of S1s that the master keeps producing. And you say, hold on, man, you told me that dream last week and you mentioned that the dude had a mustache, but in this, it doesn't have a mustache. This time you're telling me the dream. Like, isn't that weird? There's like a discrepancy there. In other words, there's not an S1. There's instead something that's split or that doesn't quite line up. So you focus on aspects and evidence of barred subjectivity. And what you can do in that moment is you can force the master's discourse into a quarter turn. This is what it means to hystericize a neurotic analysand. It's one of the basic things that I think Lacan is advocating for in terms of the clinical application of discourse theory is when you encounter a master, dear analyst, focus on slips, stammers, lapses in their speech, because then you can get them out of that position. It's about, it's about displacing the master. It's about shoving the master into a different position and asking them to speak from a position that they don't want to acknowledge, which is that of barred subjectivity. And that's why the discourses are really handy, because in a practical way, analysis of a neurotic effects a quarter turn in the master's discourse, quarter turn clockwise, that produces the discourse of the hysteric. A productive analysis of a neurotic, my reading of Lacan would suggest, is a hystericization of the master. Now you've got somebody who is increasingly speaking from the very position that the master wants to deny. Not a position of singularity, but a position of multiplicity. I am multitudes, as Whitman so well put it. That's what you want the master to finally admit. I don't know. There's a lot happening in me. I don't have full answers for all of this shit. You know what I mean? The master always seems to have a fucking answer. The master never wants to say, I don't know. The master never wants to admit that there's something behind the S1. But let me tell you, man, behind every S1 is the very same phenomenon, castration. That is fundamentally what produces the split subject. Castration is the bit of the real, hear me now, that passes into the unconscious and forms it as a field of multiplicity. You see, the unconscious is not some coherent space. It's called S2 in the analytic discourse for more than one reason. Unconscious truth is always bifurcated because there's some of it that through analysis you can come to terms with, but a whole hell of a lot of it that you cannot come to terms with. The unconscious, like truth for Lacan, is only ever a half saying and thus half knowable, which means that it always has this other half. And where two or more have gathered, there is always a third. Because if the unconscious can only be somewhat said, somewhat known through hystericizations of the analysand, it means that there is this vast impregnable remainder in the field of unknown knowledge we call the unconscious, where I can't go, where I'm never going to be able to come to terms with shit. So I've got the part of the unconscious that through analysis I can work through. I've got the part of the unconscious that even in analysis resists capture. The question then becomes,
What else do I have? I have a non-rapport between these two parts. That is the impossible. That is the sexual relationship that is no such thing, reproduced here at the level of the unconscious. Because in order to have two of anything, there must be a minimum irreducible difference or distance between them that allows them to remain as two separate and distinct entities. Lacan in Seminar 21 calls this very wonderfully an irremediable division. This is the number three. This is why, to be a good Lacanian, you always count three. He's explicit about this in Seminar 21 as well. He says, you want to do what I do as a Lacanian, as a woo-woo and a whatnot, count to three. There's always the part of unconscious truth that can be said, the part of unconscious truth that cannot be said, and then this slash, opening, cut, chasm, division, irremediable split between the two. That is a third element. That for Lacan in the 1970s, which is the period that we're working with in Lectures on Lacan, so forgive me, but that is structurally what is at stake for him. But you'll note, it's the very same chasm that we here represent with the delta of impotence from Seminar 17 forward. It's the very same thing that gives us the Lacanian theory of the math theme. It's about impasse. In the field of the unconscious that the master cannot bear, we see a multiplicity. Behind every S1, there is an S1 plus to 2 to 3 and so on, a field of multiplicity that the master can't handle. That's why S1 is the semblance of oneness, right? Here is something of the one, an illusion of mastery. But it always papers over this vast field of multiplicity, which is what the unconscious is. And so when you can give the master a quarter turn, whether it's in a relationship or in a psychoanalysis, when you give them that quarter turn that constitutes the hysterics discourse, now you get somebody who is increasingly more comfortable speaking from that field of multiplicity, where you're going to know some of what you're saying, but you're also going to realize that there's this other shit that you don't have any control over. And then you're also going to be fully prepared, as much as you can be, to encounter the impossible, irreducible division between these two. This is why there's no universe of discourse. This is why there's no such thing as the big other. This is why you only ever get something of the one. This is why you always need God's help to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help you God. Because you can't tell the whole truth. There's always way fucking more. Just think about this, bro. Like all the shit that you've already done today, you're a man of many accomplishments. Think of all the shit you still got to do today. But if you could just sit down and narrate for me every little thing that you did today, pick a sense. Let's take everything that you have smelled today. I think we'd be here for weeks. I don't think we'd ever get through a full enumeration, a full telling, which is to say a full tallying. Etymologically, telling and tallying are the same. That's why we call it a tale. That's why we recount stories. I don't think we could ever get to a full count of everything that you have smelled in the past like 8 hours of consciousness. I don't know what time you woke up, but you get the idea. That's Lacan's point as well about the unconscious. There's just not enough time for you to tell everything that's been going on with you. And what that means for Lacan is that oneness is no such thing. We have illusions of oneness. We call it love oftentimes. But all of those illusions, when we push on them, bring us back to fields of multiplicity. And what I'm just saying is that the field of multiplicity atop which the master speaks is a multiple that has been created by the logical structural experience known as castration, constraint, limitation, read language acquisition. That's why Bruce Fink, I think, does a good job just calling it symbolic alienation. It captures the way that language, sociolinguistic structures get in and constrain us. multiply us. Language is like something that lacerates us. Language is a cut into the living individual. That's what you also see at the start of Seminar 17, is that the subject is a living individual that has been cut or indented or lacerated by language. And what that means is when there's a cut introduced, you now have a field of multiplicity, not just in time, but also in space. So I
Right.
would add that as like the full, if we're really just going to dredge the whole thing up and the dilemma of the master, it's not just that the master is blind to his own fantasy. It's that the master really has a hard time accepting that they speak atop a multiplicity. That's why the whole like, what are your fucking pronouns? Like, okay, like, what are your fucking pronouns? Let's talk about your fucking pronouns. There's only one pronoun, they. Everybody I've ever met is not a he, sure as fuck ain't a she. If anything, we're just it's, but I prefer more likely we're just theys. Again, I think Granddaddy Walt Whitman got this right. I am fucking multitudes.
Yeah. Yeah. No. And it's funny thinking about, well, one, like with that, the fantasy of the master, or like let's take it back to like Freud, Lacan would call Freud's like greatest like achievement with the myth of totem taboo, that
Mm.
there's always this one daddy, this one father who enjoys all women, right? But he can't enjoy one woman, he has to enjoy all of them. So like this weird dilemma of what he wait, he's supposed to be the one, and yet he has to try to consume the all, right? The multitude. And it's this sort of like weird like impossibility. And
Yeah,
the thing
Lacan
about,
laughs at it.
you
He's
know,
like, "Are
he,
you fucking serious? Like, what misery would it be if you had to fuck all the women in your
yeah,
neighborhood? Like,
and
can you imagine? Like, take your neighborhood and then imagine Big Daddy, Daddy Sig, that you would then have to go and fuck everybody in your neighborhood that qualified as feminine. Now, remember, he's not talking about women with
yeah,
vulvas and vaginas. He's
yeah,
talking about people who enjoy according to
enjoy.
feminine logics.
Exactly. Yeah,
And he's
yeah,
like, and you have to now fuck all them.
yeah,
That's a lot of work. It sounds pretty
yeah.
fucking stressful if you ask me.
Mhm.
And so Lacan has the same thing too. Like logistically, that's impossible. Like it just doesn't work that way. Your dick would fall apart trying to do stuff like that. And he kind of laughs at it as a result. So we know that the myth of the father of the primal horde is just that.
Yeah, and that's why he's dead,
It's
and so
basic
like,
masculine fantasy.
it's like, God lives through us through the Holy Spirit. Us as multiple beings take that in, and we believe that there is a one, and
Uh,
so therefore it's like those that could be written and are subject to the phallic function and castrated are there for chasing after, the one that would complete them, because there is supposed to be one who is enjoying. I think is kind of telling, if I understand that right.
I mean, that's a tricky one. That's a tricky one that you wade into. Um, it's I think a good way to just kind of remember how Lacan is thinking through this is to remember that for him, all masculine enjoyment is phallic enjoyment,
Hmm.
which means that you're always looking for parts that you think can make you feel whole. You're always looking for ways to like close the gap of which you're made, the gap in split subject. We want something that makes us feel whole. So the discourse of the master plays in well here. But in this masculine fantasy, the reason why we're always looking for the part, the partner reduced to part, right? She's got to have this, she's got to have that in order to make me feel like I'm a real man, is so that we can approximate this fantastical masculine figure of the man who enjoys all the women without limit, the big dog. You feel me? Like that's part of what's happening. It's maybe the only thing that's happening with masculine enjoyment. And it's one of the reasons why in basic masculine pornography, very rarely is it just the woman, a woman's parts. There's always a big dick swimming through the pornographic field. That's crucial for the masculine subject. And this brings me to the thing that I think is a good mnemonic technique to just remember. Lacan says that masculine enjoyment is homo to the hilt. It's gay. There is a homoeroticism built into masculine enjoyment. Because what we fundamentally fantasize about when we're fucking her, so to speak, is not her, but the real man, the big daddy that we think this somehow makes us. So hear me now. When I'm fucking my partner from a masculine vantage point, I'm getting off on imagining a bigger dick than mine. I'm imagining the big daddy. I'm becoming the big daddy. But in order for me to do my work, so to speak, I have to sustain this wildly homoerotic fantasy. I'm thinking about that big dick more than anything else when I'm engaged in this stereotypical masculine practice. Masculine enjoyment is fucked up, man.
Yeah,
It's always
and that's
toxic for this reason.
no, for real. And this is like the point, like the fact that with masculine enjoyment in that sense, the way that like the masculine is phallically situated, partializing, the woman in an attempt to be completed, but then also idealizing manhood
There
itself,
you go. There you
right?
go.
Yeah,
I think that's great. And what you have in Lacan's formulas on the masculine side is you have all men, this totalized set of all men, which, as I know you are familiar with, can only be established and sustained by an exception. There's a logic of exceptionality that has to be there. In order for all men to enjoy according to a certain phallic pattern, there must be one man who's excluded from the group, a no man, a
right.
nothing that maintains their everything.
And right here, this is
There
where
you go.
again I really like how you mentioned, like, the signifier, the letter he's done with that, and this is why, like, in these math themes that he plays out in 19 and 20 with sexuation, it has to do with the universal quantifier of an all and existent, and so the
Yep.
signifier, or just the subject or speaking being, sexuated body, is now but a variable within, the phallic field and the quantifier of there is one, or there are all, not one, etc., etc.
That's what he's messing with.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah,
Now, I think the masculine side of that is really fucking easy.
yeah,
I mean, here are the formulas. The masculine side is the easiest of them all. In order for all men to be governed by the phallic function, you see here, there has to be a fantasy sustained by them that there exists some man who is not so governed, who is not governed by the phallic function. So here you've got all masculine subjects, which doesn't mean you have a dick, by the way. It's tempting always to think about this heteronormatively, but what Lacan is talking about has nothing to do with anatomy. It's got nothing to do with what's behind your swimsuit. It's about how you enjoy, particularly other people. To enjoy, I know women, stone cold, straight women that fuck like masculine subjects. That's real, man. Not in the Lacanian sense, but in the sense that that shit exists. So being a masculine subject doesn't mean you have a penis. And it's not what it's about at all. It's about how you enjoy others. And what I've said is that the masculine subject is the one that enjoys reducing their partners to parts that they think can make them feel whole. So my partner, if I'm a masculine subject, is only ever there to complete me, to supplement me. Behind every great man, there's a greater woman. You know what I'm saying? Like puts food on the table, keeps me going. We have all these fucking narratives about the way that your partner serves you. See how we're talking about the master's discourse again? She becomes an S2 that is reduced to the only thing she can produce for you. There's little a, as an
yeah.
object of surplus enjoyment. So the
Let's
question
go.
is, what have you done for me, Andrew?
Yeah,
We don't even have to be sexual about this. I only want to hang out with you insofar as you can bring something to me.
right.
The
Yeah,
friend who always is networking, who is instrumentalizing every friendship and thinking to themselves, what can Andrew do for me?
right.
I would only take this call, for instance, because, oh, Andrew's going to help advertise Lacan, and this is all about what can Andrew do? You know, this is again why through the structure of the master as it connects to the masculine subject, you get a wildly late capital reading of exploitation and consumer economies where it's all about like, what can that motherfucker do for me? What have you done for me? It's all about instrumentalizing others. That's how the masculine subject enjoys. The bigger question, though, is why? Why is the master so inclined to reify, fragment, commodify, and consume their partners as parts? Well, you could read it as the master's discourse. You could read it in a Hegelian way. The master is lonely because he only ever sees a master that's going to take him out or a slave that hasn't yet joined his minions. But as a result, the master is lonely because he never knows an equal. Everybody he meets is either somebody that's going to take him out and reduce him to a slave, or somebody who will soon join the group of servants that call this dude master. But nevertheless, the master is fucking lonely. He's like God. He's got nothing to do, man, because he's got nobody that is his equal. So you could run this through a Hegelian logic of mastery. I don't think that's worth doing. I think the more important thing here is that the reason why the master masculinized is always reducing their partners to parts and commodifying them and talking about all the shit their partner does that's great and how she sucks a dick and all this kind of like bro talk that we see so often these days. Face it, that's the world that we just voted into existence.
Exactly. And
All of that talk, though, is fundamentally homoerotic. It is fundamentally dedicated to a worshipful, homo to the hilt fantasy of a big dog, a tomcat. Lacan is really good um, on this tomcat imagery as well, paying homage. We're always paying homage to a big man. The uncut, see, the one who's uncastrated, who enjoys without limit. The rest of us motherfuckers, we enjoy because we're limited. Because we're castrated, we know a certain kind of enjoyment. Lacan's point is that that enjoyment is phallic because it's always trying to find something that can help us pretend like we weren't castrated, to imagine ourselves as that big dog. Think about this, man. Think about how much porn is based on a heteronormative coupling in which one calls the other daddy, big daddy, and says things like, whose pussy is it? It's your pussy, daddy. Whose pussy is it? It's your pussy, daddy. You see what I'm saying?
yeah,
Notice how that props up the masculine subject. That's right. I'm the father of the primal horde. I
exactly.
own all this pussy. See, like you don't have to be sophisticated to
Yeah.
get at what Lacan is understanding here as a
It's
masculine mode of enjoyment.
it's like a simple logic that's ultimately flawed, like, and
100%
and
flawed.
and it,
100% flawed.
and like even going back to the thing about Greeks and writing, I mean, look about how you could think of it, and it goes on today. Like when I was in the Navy, we went to Bahrain and Dubai, and like we have to always, no matter what country we go to, we have to learn before we get off that ship because American sailors are dumb as fuck. We drink, we fight, and we get in trouble. To learn their customs and norms, and that homosexuality was forbidden, but there was always this hidden rule that women were for reproduction and men were for pleasure.
Mm.
Do you see this happen in the
You're
institution
saying in the Navy or
in Bahrain
were you in Bahrain? Okay.
in Bahrain and in Dubai and in all the other parts of Middle East where homosexual display in public is forbidden?
Yeah.
But it happens in the closet with the rich men, behind the
Oh,
scenes.
you know it, dude.
Yeah, and so like I think you're going back to even like ancient Greece. You mentioned writing and all that, and it's like women were economos. They were part of the management of the household and the economy,
That, yeah.
producing S2s. Meanwhile, men were in the symposium getting drunk and, making love with other men,
Yep.
uh, and
Yep.
idealizing men. That's why they had to have the institution of pederasty to create
Yep.
noble men, right? There's the homoeroticism right
Now
there
you
in
got
the
it.
phallic function.
Now you
And I
got it.
can't help but think of like this funny meme that somebody made, but now it's circling through the internet of like snippets of different talks from sports commentators where they say like the most out of pocket, unintentional
Yep.
gay shit.
Yep.
and was it what's his name? David Goggins. Just a clip of him running, and he's just saying in the camera, "I'm out here getting hard, just thinking about you. The time is coming where you're about to meet." And so it's just like,
I
yeah,
mean, I love when we can bring that to focus. And notice what was happening in that moment. Memes like that are a kind of cultural hystericization of the master. Because what you do is you say, hold up, man, all of your super straight, anti-gay, I only fuck the bitches talk is propped up on this homoerotic narrative from antiquity forward, where you engage in a bunch of gay ass shit, gay behaviors. For instance, I have a friend who studies hazing rituals in the military and in total institutions like fraternities, specifically around masculinity. And he told me once about this hazing ritual in a fraternity where the test was one pledge had to put his penis in another pledge's mouth and not get erect. And in order to make sure that that pledge did not have an erection while his penis was in another man's mouth, all the fraternity brothers would have to stand around and watch just to make sure that this guy wasn't gay, that he didn't enjoy having his penis in some other man's mouth. And I heard this story from my buddy. He's a total wizard with this stuff. He's fucking genius. And I just paused for a second and I was like, dude, this is what I'm fucking talking about. All the homoeroticism that props up super toxic straight guy stuff. No, just the vast contradiction between a fantasy that is completely homoerotic and the act of never doing anything gay because I only fuck the bitches. That is exactly the contradiction baked into masculinity. And so, what I think actually is at stake when you take Lacan really seriously around sexuation is the difference between a masculine and a feminine subject that is very, very simple. The masculine subject is just a feminine subject in denial. That is the only difference between the two. Fundamentally, when you really cut that shit to the bone, the difference is that the masculine subject is the one who denies that they are in fact feminine. Now, in order to explain all that, you have to understand how feminine enjoyment works. But the idea is that the masculine subject is just the one who refuses to admit that they are in fact feminine. And that may be, if you ask me, that's the only real difference.
right. And so like that's why if you like, I knew like when you drew them out, like in the 19 and 20 sessions I attended, like you had them situated in like two Venn diagrams, and like part of feminine jouissance non-sexual, which is attributed to the mystic, is always sticking out of that vector of what phallic masculine enjoyment encompasses, because there
Right.
is a phallic side to the feminine enjoyment, and so far it's only captured by it. And I think you stated it like the woman wants to be that part object that would complete the inconsistency of the big other, right?
It's a weird thing when you say she wants that. Uh,
Yeah. Oh well, I say it in the way because like in a sense it's like the way that their subjectivity relates to the phallus, because it's not like man relates to woman and woman relates to man. No, they relate to different aspects of the phallus. So like for if I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, the masculine, the bro type that we've been talking about for quite a while is a barred subject that could only relate to woman in the semblance of objet a in the fundamental fantasy. Whereas for Lacan, it seems like, woman relates to it in the matheme of S barred A, right?
what is S barred A? Oh,
Yeah.
signifier of the lacking
Yeah,
bigger. Yeah,
exactly.
that's right. That
Yeah.
for Lacan, he for years, he just claimed that over and over. About Seminar 18 is when he gets really clear about this. He's like, yo, man, the other sex here is always a signifier of the fact that the other doesn't exist. And so he links very clearly and very smartly, I think, up through Seminar 20, the signifier of the big barred other to feminine enjoyment. She's the one who always shows up
and reminds you that there's no such thing as a big, full other. Now, extrapolate from that. Are we talking about God? Perhaps. Are we talking about the father of the primal horde? Also, a fat perhaps there. She is the one who shows up and constantly tells the masculine subject, if only the masculine subject had ears to hear, that there's no such thing as oneness, that you can't be whole. There is no big dog. That shit doesn't exist. Here, I think, is the diagram that you were referring to. Something
Absolutely.
along these lines.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you've got the phallic field as this pink square,
Hmm.
indicated by the phallic function symbol at the top. And then you've got the masculine subject as a kind of half moon or a cookie with a bite out of it to remind us that this is a lacking subject. And then you've got the feminine subject where some, but not all, of her enjoyment appears in the phallic field. That logic is a really important one. It's the same logic that Lacan applies to truth. It's the same logic that helps him understand the symptom. It's the same logic that helps him understand the unconscious. It's a some, but not all. And that's crucial for understanding how he ultimately gets to the sexual non-rapport. The non-rapport is the but between that some and the not all. You see, the feminine subject is not all here in the phallic field for the masculine consumption. But nor is she out here in this jouissance. She's neither some nor not all. She's both, and never one without also being the other. She is some but not all. And as a result, you have three elements that comprise feminine enjoyment. Some of it is phallic, not all of it is, so some of it's not phallic. And then there's an impossibility of shifting it all to one side or the other. She's always somewhat phallicized and somewhat not phallicized. And as a result, always split, divided, multiple. She is not all there, but she's not all here either. Notice, this is the very truth that the master cannot bear. All I'm telling you is the truth that is barred subject. I'm telling you what an S with a slash through it means. It means that you are a some, but not all. That's all that slashed S has ever meant. A three-part structure. Some, but not all. And that's why Lacan says you want to do his work, you got to count to three. Now, some people might say, and I get pushback on this regularly. People, oh no, you got to count to four. You got to count to four. I get it to some extent. I get it. But I read Lacan. And maybe in later seminars, he's going to say, no, the magic number's four. But I read him explicitly in Seminar 21, telling you that to do that work is to count three. So what I like about the diagram that you queue up, and I'm glad you bring it up, is that it provides us with a visual field, a really simple visual field for understanding how masculine and feminine subjects enjoy. I think you can see in each of these places, this is a topology, no doubt. In each of these places, you can see the basic structures of masculine and feminine enjoyment. And dude, the stake here, yeah, it's theoretical. Yeah, this shit is conceptual. Yeah, it's clinical also. But this is fundamentally about like what kind of relationship you want to be in. Like, I don't want to be in a relationship with a masculine subject. It doesn't mean that I'm not gay. What I'm saying is like I don't want to be in a relationship where all I am to my partner is something that they think completes them. So for instance, I'm a professor. And one of the things that that means in terms of human sexuality is that I'm often encountering people who see me, sexually or not, as some sort of an intelligent add to their friend group. Like I'm the weird, smart one that's going to say something that's kind of off the wall, but has the degrees and the books to back it up. there's a kind of objectification that comes with this kind of work. And I just find it absolutely disgusting. Like I'm not the fucking daddy said you weren't smart enough when you were 7. You internalize that shit. And so you fall in love with somebody whom you think is smart. Like, I don't want to play that game with my partner. I'm not there to supplement them. I'm not there to plug their hole. And I
Right.
don't want them to be there to plug mine. Lacan's definition of love, profound love. Everybody fucks around with Seminar 8. No, man. Seminar 17 gives us the gem, but I found a bit in Seminar 21 in our last series that blew my fucking mind. Lacan's theory of love as giving what you don't have, it culminates in a non-rapport between you and your partner. And he says that love is 2 half sayings that do not overlap. Notice, the masculine subject is always hoping that this part of her that enters the phallic field is going to fit right in to his missing part. So you got to think of this kind of like the masculine is subject hopes that the part of her that is governed by the phallic function is going to be the part that just slides right over and completes his circle. So you can label the part of her that is the sum but not all. There's that objet a that you were talking about as an object for surplus enjoyment. This is the commodity. This is her part that he thinks is going to plug his hole. Now let's label him appropriately then. Here is your slashed S. Here is your little a. And between the two, we can add the lozenge. And you can say this is the basic formula for fantasy. The masculine subject is a barred subject in search of a partner they can reduce to a certain part that they think fleshes them out, completes them, and they call it love. Now, you've been to my recent lecture series, so you know that when I'm talking about this kind of love, I always add the N word on the front of it, narcissistic. It's narcissistic love. Why? Because we imagine that the partner reduced to parts is the thing that can make us whole. It's never about them. It's about us experiencing a little taste of what we think the big dog enjoys every day. So notice this masculine fantasy. This is the same fantasy that the master has no ears or eyes to see. This is why Lacan says the master is fundamentally ignorant. What the master is fundamentally ignorant of is the fantasy atop which they speak and command others to produce. The master is ignorant for that very precise reason. And all we're doing with this diagram is showing that this is also how masculine subjects work. They don't get that when they objectify and commodify their partners, what they're doing is playing right into the basic prop of desire, which is a certain fantasy where a neurotic split subject is looking for any way to feel whole, complete, consistent, and one. Psychoanalysis at the level of inquiry, but also at the level of clinical practice, is designed to bring all of this up, to present all of this. In theory, we write it. That's what this is, my brother. I'm just putting meaningless written symbols on the board when I hold up this diagram. In practice, though, this is the shit we listen for. And I'm not just saying like if you're a clinician, I'm saying like I read Lacan as crucial pieces of equipment for living my life. And when I'm thinking about like my partner and what I want out of my relationship with my friends, with my lovers, with my, you name it, man. I don't want to be somebody else's part. Or if I do, I want to be really clear about that. This is your dick. Tonight, you fuck it however you want. I think it's really, there's a difference here. The neurotic can flirt with perversion. I'm happy to be somebody's fuck toy every now and again, but I go into that with my eyes wide open. I'm happy to pretend and play the fantasy. But I think it's dilemmatic when you've got somebody who's gone in with their eyes wide shut and they think that their only way they can be in a relationship is either to become the part that completes somebody else or to be the consumer who reduces the partner to a part for their own enjoyment. So I see most relationships really foundering on the masculine style and a feminine subject who's all too willing, here I'm responding to your original point, to play that part. That's the question. Are you willing to play that part for somebody else's narcissistic pursuit of wholeness? And if the answer is no, you still have some work to do because there's always some, but not all of you that is playing that part. So I'm not saying that you can like step outside the phallic field. In fact, I'm telling you, you don't want to do that because that's one of the basic definitions of psychosis. Who indeed is the father of the mythical horde? He's the guy outside on the corner in a florid psychotic state yelling at the telephone pole. You don't want to be the mythical father who enjoys without limit. Clinically, I would call that psychosis.
It's interesting to think about that because I was about to bring up the fact that like, oh, you've tied in the master's discourse to understand sexuation
You
and
know
the
it.
masculine attempt to achieve oneness, or we could even say, since it's narcissistic, as early as Freud would say, this Edenic bliss, which he talks about in Civilization, Discontent with Religion, but I think it really culminates even in this narcissistic love. I'm
Right.
curious what your thoughts are on the way that I would say that capitalist discourse dominates us, that affects and even exacerbates this in a different way. Because um, if you notice in the capitalist discourse, because you wrote it down in our talk with Daniel Tutt, that it's this
Yeah,
sort of flip between the pole of the master's discourse, so we have the bar to S on top and S1 on the bottom.
that's
But if
right.
there's social bonds, the arrow disappears. So it's there's no addressing to the field of knowledge,
Winner,
you
winner,
know?
chicken dinner, dude. That's it. That's the money right there.
So,
Because
You take the master's discourse and you give the left side a turn.
mhm,
And Zoom is probably going to invert all this shit, right? But you give the left side of the master's discourse a turn and you invert that shit. And you're right, it breaks the arrow of adversivity.
mhm,
It breaks what the basic function of discourse does for Lacan. It breaks its basic function, which is social linkage.
mhm,
Discourse for Lacan is not just about mathematizing figures of the impossible. Discourse for Lacan is also about how social relations are formed. And I don't mean sexual relations, I mean just social links between people. This is in part why he's so fucking down on institutions like international organizations of psychoanalysts, why he thinks conferences are a fucking joke, even though he still goes to them and gives talks and shit like that. But like this basic belief that there is a congress or relationship to be had among psychoanalysts, he just doesn't buy it. He thinks the fundamental social bond of psychoanalysis is between analyst and analysand. And he has never met two analysands that are the same. They are all very unique. Discourse is where we see those bonds established. And the capitalist discourse, you're right, Andrew, is super fucking troubling because it breaks even the illusion of us being in conversation with each other. Now, my orientation is not towards an other, but toward a brand, a logo, something that I'm eager to consume, to purchase. That's what S1 becomes in the capitalist discourse. Now, for me, since I'm kind of a simpleton, I always just like to draw the shit. I always think with Lacan with pen and paper because it just helps me to visualize it. So I'm holding up on the screen a rendering of the capitalist discourse. And you'll notice here I am as a desirous consumer, you might say. I would say a dissatisfied human being. And I'm oriented towards an S1 that I think is going to be the final commodity for me. Like, dude, like I drive a Toyota, but you know what, dude? Once Lectures on Lacan takes off and I really start raking in the fucking digits, you know what I'm saying? Going to the bank, fucking cashing all them checks that I make from Lectures on Lacan. And once I really start fucking, yeah, then I'm gonna get the Lexus, dude. I'm
I
gonna
can't
trade
help.
in my old Toyota for the fucking Lexus. That's the S1.
Yeah,
It's
I
always the
can't.
next grade up.
I can't help but think of that South Park episode with the hybrids, where he moves to San Fran and everybody's just smelling their own farts.
Dude, that's not too far from the truth, man. The left coast is a kind of smelly place sometimes. But the capitalist discourse is like this. You're always thinking about what's the next level up for consumption. And that's the, I don't know, maybe Marx couldn't figure this out. We'd have to ask Daniel what he thinks about this, but I feel like part of what Marx couldn't figure out is that capitalism would have this way of commodifying every insurgent moment and turning it into something that can be bought at, I don't know, Old Navy, but also that it just produces this endless hierarchy of consumer options. So I've got the Toyota finally, but there's always the Lexus. And above the, and then there are all these tiers of car purchases. My point is that there's always something that with a little more scratch I could buy that's a little bit nicer. And this is how do we read the capitalist discourse, is that the dissatisfied subject thinks that they can orient towards a commodity, a new shirt, a new car, a new wife, a new life. But what happens is that that S1, that commodity, once we get our hands on it, it suddenly just goes into the garage with all of our other shit. The new shirt soon passes into the closet, full of all the other shirts that used to be new. Here, the S2 is all the old commodities that your new shiny object soon passes into. And I think this is a really important part about understanding what S1 is. It becomes a piece of shit. That shirt that got you so excited for the next day at work, the brand new shirt, is now one of dozens of shirts probably hanging in your closet that you were like, no, 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 need to donate, got to get rid of it, hate this fucking shirt, blah, blah. We go through these commodities. We capture them, we bring them home, we get all excited. There's a little spike, what is what we call surplus enjoyment. That's a little spike. It's a little crumb or morsel of jouissance. That's what we call surplus enjoyment. But then pretty soon that fades. And that shiny S1, the one commodity we thought was going to solve all of our problems, winds up in the closet with all the other degraded products. And as a result, we are left wanting again. We are left feeling dissatisfied. And that returns us back to the state of dissatisfied consumerism. And now we're looking for something else to buy, a new S1. And so the capitalist discourse, Lacan doesn't really develop it much, but it's really dilemmatic, I think, because it's like this go-kart, it's like a go-kart track. All the other discourses have stoppages built into them, points where there are vectors emerging but none going in and dead ends. Not so in the capitalist discourse. The capitalist discourse just goes around and round and round and round. And I don't think that Marx anticipated that. I think he thought that it was that capitalism would find its end at some point and couldn't imagine that it would actually become this fucking go-kart track. Um, and some days I really feel like I feel like I'm on that track, man. I feel like, goddamn, I look around my world, I walk around San Francisco and I'm like, fucking A, man, this is all just the capitalist discourse. Look at me excited, waiting for my new bike seat to come in the mail from Amazon. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah.
Yeah, and that's what's funny too, is because I mean, you get so nuanced with the way that the capitalist discourse has deteriorated the social bond because there was a point in capitalism like the 80s where the mall was not just me consuming and getting in the circuit of exchange value, but there was a social relation, but also a social value to, hey, this is what we do when we get out of school on Friday. We're gonna go with our friends. The one with cool mom's got the van, and she's gonna drop us all off, and we're gonna buy some cool shit, eat some burgers, and go to the movies. Now, when you go to the mall, it is a ghost town.
Now
Everybody is online shopping.
you're
Uh,
talking.
you know,
Yep.
it's
Keep going. Yeah,
isolated. It's
keep going,
isolated
dude. Yep.
enjoyment,
Yep.
and you're not happy. And you could put a review that, oh, the delivery guy was so rude,
Yep.
and yelled at me, or this thing was already half open when I received it,
Yep.
and you're in your own little island of crumbs and enjoyment. There's no
Yep.
social relation anymore. And even
Yep.
some movie theaters are still there, don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
but they don't play anything new. It's always back to the past, where it's like, hey, we're gonna watch Star Wars episode 3 at the movie theater so you can get that nostalgic feeling. And not to sound like
Yeah.
Baudrillard or anything, but like that's
Yeah.
honestly what the figure eight does. It's like trying to reproduce
So is
work of
this
the
my
past.
new is this my new other? Is this my social bond? Is
Yeah.
this what I have my social bond with? I think you're
Yeah.
right.
I think that's like what Lacan was getting at with Latouche and
Yes, yes, that's where it starts. That's where it starts. By the mid 70s, I mean, he returns to this topic perennially. I think he is a terrific theorist of new media. I think his theory of language is fundamentally an information theory. It's fundamentally a digital theory. He is absolutely a theorist of what we would now call like a digital economy or digital culture. And the logics of the symbolic as a field of presence and absence, and where the word creates the thing and pronounces its death at the same time, that just speaks volumes about how digital culture works. I think he was extremely prescient about this, in part, I think, because he was thinking, he cut his teeth with language, not with Saussure, but with informatics and cybernetics, thinking about those 1940s Macy's conference. He's hanging out with, I mean, he's thinking about this shit in terms of the digital revolution, which is the third industrial revolution that we're in right now, right? You had steam, which gave us Freud. You had steel, which gave us the skyscraper. And then we have the digit. And that's where we are right now. It gave us computer science. It also gave me this. And I think Lacan was really prescient in understanding that ones and zeros mattered when it came to language, but also that there would be a proliferation of gadgets, of devices. It's not about, he doesn't quite know what the gadgets are going to be. Like TV for him is the one in the 70s that he's talking a lot about, the way that TV consumes us. But I think you're right to cue up his start. Was it in 17 that he introduces Laugh House? When does he start doing
yeah,
that?
yeah. It's in
16 or
17.
17?
Yeah, it's 17 because he starts to talk about this idea of the allethosphere, which then he'll introduce
Yeah, yeah.
Latus because of this weird thing. And this is one of the things that I was inspired by Daniels, that like nobody's really brought up this little nugget that he talks about in 16 about the absolutization of the market and
Hmm.
its conjunction with science. I call it a perverse relationship. There's a
Mhm.
perverse marriage between science and its production of knowledge in the university, as even the university discourse, and what fundamental fantasy it has with mastery, and then the absolutization of the market, where then you get the aftermath of a market economy of knowledge, and the way
That's
that
interesting. You
you
should
know
write that.
yeah, that's what I've been working on in this paper. And I
Good.
think
Yeah. Write that shit up.
that's what he's been building up with this thing of the allethosphere and Latus, that like rather than knowledge, because um knowledge can't find a big toe to complete all discourse. Well, it's new
I
field.
like your big toe. Your big
Yeah,
toe is good. I like that.
the big theory of everything. Now its new field of meaning has been the market, so now it's able to, I mean, going back to what I was saying too about the mall. I mean, look at other things where it's like, I think it's made us fear the other and the other person. That's why we're caught in our enjoyment. Like I saw this thing, and it's a
Good
legit
word.
ad about how, so they're saying depression's real, mental health is a real thing, but now you can get it on an app. We're scared of professionals, especially as Americans. We have this weird paranoia of the doctor,
You bet we do.
especially with the conservatives and the anti-vaxxers. But then the other side, it's like there's this paranoia of everything because I went to university. I'm a leftist, or I'm some type of liberal, and I read this and this that feminist thinker, but I don't trust doctors or anything.
Mhm.
but yet I get the app on my phone to adhere to my ADHD or my depression, as if it's like an astrology, right? But it's so weird how this Lathus, this absolutization of the market, has now made, the need for mental health as quick as an app on my phone.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
is so bizarre.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I
And
really
so,
appreciate how I love seeing how you think. I like hearing you talk through them all and then work your way to this.
yeah.
And I think that's a really good sound logic that you're working there. And I
Mhm.
love that where it started too is like is you pull culture out of commodity. You're no longer just like you're buying burgers. Yeah, you're spending money on the tickets. Yeah, you're buying some dumbass trinket at the mall. But fundamentally, it's about the mom with the van that puts the friends in there and drops you all off. And yeah, I mean it's sketchy, right? Because you've got your friendships mediated through consumerism, and that becomes the place where you go to be a junior adult. But there was community there. You'd fuck around at the mall. You'd go wander around. You'd get in trouble. Like you do stuff. It wasn't just about buying shit. And this shift that you're tracing to the Amazon economy, where now we no longer go and interact with anybody. We just interact with this body that then produces some sequence of events that results in a package arriving at our door. I think that's a pretty sound insight, dude. I think you should run with that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and it goes back to like again what you're saying, and this is why I brought up the analyst or like the capitalist discourse is because, I don't know if you thought about this too, but I don't think analysts have thought about this enough. It's like, what does that make of their patients?
That's
Do they
right,
have
dude.
to flip that knot to bring them back to the master's discourse so that they could speak and address and create a social bond for analysis to be possible? Um, it's things like
Listen,
that, that I think
yeah.
about
Let me
practice.
draw this up because it's something that I forget what lecture series I was doing, um, but I'm gonna just draw this a little bit differently. So here again, you've got the capitalist discourse, right? One of the things I find really interesting is that you can juxtapose it right next to the analytic discourse. And like I said, I forget which lecture series I was doing, but you can throw these two discourses right next to each other and produce something that's pretty fucking wild. And you can look at what I'm trying to answer your question about how the clinician might deal with the capitalist discourse when their so-called customer shows up and is doing what it does. Every move from slashed S down to S1, yes, it is an opportunity to get back on this go-kart track that is the capitalist discourse. But notice also that is the exact same move that we see the analyzan doing when they engage in symptomatic statements. So what you could also envision is another alternate pathway. Every turn of the dissatisfied consumer to a new shiny object is also an opportunity to listen for symptomatic stupidities with which we're always dripping no matter what, and put us back into a different discourse, a discourse that looks something more like this part of the analytic discourse. So I see the capitalist discourse as a major blind spot and shortcoming in a lot of clinical talk that I'm kind of privy to sometimes. But I also see it as a really great opportunity to find a new way to present the analytic discourse. The analytic discourse can annex from the capitalist discourse. And that's why I write the mathemes that way, right alongside each other. Like I said, the place where I developed all this, it's in a lecture. I don't know, but I think that image is the tile for that YouTube lecture. And I think it's extremely promising
but it's all just at the level of working Lacan's discourses. So maybe, in other words, the escape hatch for the capitalist discourse is the analytic discourse that can be made to abut it. Hard maybe.
Yeah. No, and yeah, and that's my speculation too. And it's like it's not that like again like with whoever's listening, like there is always this tendency to kind of like Manichaeanize like technology as if it's like this evil thing just because it is. There is a byproduct of it from the production of capitalism, but it's
Yeah.
brought many good things like you're not going to get a conglomeration of Lacanians in or people that are just diehard about wanting to learn this stuff in the university. It's happening exactly what we're doing right now. And I think
Mhm.
that's also in a way where a social bond, is happening, through this what was once a Lathus is now trying to get at something. And I think that's like a blind spot that came about in a positive way from the effects of COVID-19 and the
Big time.
social distancing and what's it called, the quarantine, that
Yeah.
it allowed for academics and stuff like that to be on here, but even as a new space for people that do want to go out and socialize and especially learn this stuff, but can't because they can't get access to it. Now you can get access to it, and it's not meeting the market.
Yeah.
I even I like quote unquote advertise. I even say like I'm not trying to meet the demands of the algorithm. I don't call myself a podcast. I'm not trying to monetize. I would, be grateful if like 100 views got on here, and sometimes I get a 1K, sometimes I get 20. But the fact it's like this is a conversation for those who have ears to hear, the
Yeah.
adjectivity to it. And I think
Yeah.
that's like one of those like sort of not like oh, this is gonna be it because it ends up being the, as Zizek says, like the same type of logic of, oh, you just have to recycle all your cans and your bottles separately, do your part to help the environment. It's like do your part as an analyst so that we could all overthrow capitalism. But at the same time, there is some social phenomenon rising where we get a large community from this space. And I've never seen so many people from around the world that are just like, I want to learn this French dude, you know?
Yeah. It's wild. I mean, it really is interesting. And I think you've got your finger on something that is very important here. And you know what? You've got more than your finger on this too, because let me tell you what has happened with lectures on Lacan. You have happened. Ellie has happened. You, Ellie, and Tiffy hanging out with Gwen has happened. You follow me on this? And people who are watching this, they don't know who any of these fucking people are. But my point is that the intellectual community that Lectures on Lacan has become, for instance, among many others, has actually produced real world interactions and friendships and love ships between real people who share space and time, real people who are going grocery shopping with each other perhaps a little bit later today. And I just want to say that like that's the most profound and moving part about what you're saying is what it leads to. This virtual space where people from all over the world have come together to try and learn something that's really difficult, but have fun doing it. It actually has produced real world friendships. The second thing I want to say about that is a little more like technical and kind of nerdy, but also really important from a Lacanian point of view. Lacan thinks analysis happens with a confrontation between two bodies. He's really clear about this in Seminar 19B or worse. He says, all my sessions begin in a consulting room where another body walks in and sits down. And that confrontation between two bodies is where it all begins. I think this is, for him, the only way to do psychoanalysis. I don't think you can do that shit through telemedicine. Now, I get in debates all the time. I have a friend practicing Lacanian. I won't you probably know who he is. He during COVID, he shifted all of his clients, all of his work to the phone. And his argument, he's a smart dude. His argument was, all I need is the voice. That's the only part of their body that I actually need to do my work. And I was like, I ain't that kind of doctor. What am I supposed to say? I thought it was, yeah, maybe. But wouldn't it be better if you also could smell a motherfucker? Wouldn't it be better if you could see what they do with their feet when they talk about their uncle? I mean, I think that being there in a co-present environment for Lacan was really fundamental to the work that is done in this thing called psychoanalysis. Being there, my point is this, being there matters more, not less, when it's really easy to do this shit virtually. And that's the point I want to make in all this. Yes, it's really easy for you and I to get together and do something like what we're doing right now. But what's great about what we're doing right now is that it makes the time when we actually meet up in person so much more special. Being there is more amazing and meaningful because we never have to be there anymore. So when I'm going to pick you up for our date, I can pull up in front of your house and I can text you and be like, hey, hooker, I'm here. Come on down. You see? Everybody's a hooker in my book. Sorry, I don't mean that, anything. I was, hey, hooker, come on down. Let's go do this. And but you know what's even more meaningful? When I fucking park my car, I get out and I walk up and I knock on your front door and say, let's go. You see what I'm saying? Like when you can be there and show up, it makes a huge difference because it's so easy. I don't have to do any of that. So I actually think that the Lacanian priority on being there, co-present in the consulting room, should be more of an emphasis now in the telemedicine post-COVID age than it has ever been. We can do this shit via Zoom. We can do this shit perhaps only through the phone. But because we can do all this virtually, it's so much more meaningful when two members of the Lectures on Lacan community meet, fall in love, and decide to share some cats together. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Absolutely.
she's
Yeah.
not sleeping in a different bed across the country. She's not drinking from a different pint of beer. That's a real thing that you all are out there in the world doing. That for
This
me is
is her seminar, by the way.
there you go, dude. See, that's what matters to me. And let me also note this: one of the people whom you know, uh, when they found out I was teaching Seminar 21, printed a copy, had it manufactured, threw a cover on the front of it, and mailed it to me. And the going to my mailbox, getting the book that was custom built, that somebody else's hands have touched and put together and shipped to me, I'm not reducing that intellectual partner to that particular part that is the book, but it was magical having a material artifact. Not, a press sends me a book all the fucking time. I'm not talking about that. This is not even a real book. Somebody printed, produced, designed a cover, and then physically mailed something. I think that's incredibly meaningful. The more we can read this shit on PDF form, the more meaningful it is when somebody takes the time to print it and physically deliver it to your office. So I hold that up as a great hope in this mass mediated existence that COVID has allowed for us as friends and as therapists and as interlocutors, that it actually reprioritizes being there. It makes co-presence matter more, not less.
Yeah, no, that's really cool, and I think I know who you're talking about. Was this, and you got that really nice, cool cover of Seminar 21.
Primo, man.
Yeah,
What matters is it's just the fact that it's an object in the world
yeah,
that somebody produced. Um, and I like what we can do. I like
yeah.
that these conversations can occur. Listen, I know you're short on time, so um, what are your technical questions? Do you have any, is there anything I can help with to like, what can I do to support you in terms of like, you had that quote from like the start of Seminar 16. I know you're interested in discourse,
Yeah, no, I think it
topology
really,
and structure. Like what can we do to really
I think honestly, like, even though like I had like a plan in mind, it's like again, throw some martial arts again. What does Mike Tyson say? Everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. Well, everybody has questions and a plan until somebody speaks, right? And so
That's for sure.
I think that like really was more uh helpful than just like staying on topic of what I wanted to initially ask, because it definitely brought up more to think about and more to riff off of. And it's a conversation that I'm gonna have to listen to once I post it. I'm gonna be going back and taking notes. I think you really did more than just the technical part, which was a lot better, and even builds more with the rapport, because it's like you're a teacher, you're somebody that I definitely, I'm saying it like, to you one on one, but even everybody could hear that, I look up to you. I definitely think that you're somebody who's doing it in a genuine way to help create lifelong learners and a community. So it did more than just be like, okay, here are my questions, speak. I'm a hysteric and you're the subject supposed to know,
Isn't that a fucking wild one?
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I know, I think even more was just like the stuff on sexuation. I think many people with your help, including like for me to have been more clarifying that it doesn't reduce down Lacan to like some heteronormative,
No, not at
jargon.
all.
I think that was like really elaborative. Um, yeah, I don't really have any more questions. I think you answered everything.
Well, then let's just end with this.
Yeah.
What is the type of love where we see two half sayings that do not overlap?
Hmm.
That is a love between two feminine subjects.
Mm,
So I would say that like the wager, again, in Lacan's theory of sexuation, is that it's possible to give the masculine subject a few turns and help them into a more feminine mode of enjoyment.
yeah.
And I think that when Lacan says love is giving what you don't have and then reciprocating, I think what he's getting at is what happens when two feminine subjects
Yeah.
enjoy, where some but not all of their enjoyment is present, able to be captured, commodified, stroked, and enjoyed by another. But it's a some but not all. And so I would just offer, like, as a primary stake in all of this, uh, it wouldn't just be a way of being with others, but a way of also being with oneself. That's what the feminine subject has. It has an ability to enjoy itself. Because it is multiple, it can be beside itself. Isn't this fundamentally what Socrates meant when he said, everything I have, I take with me, and I'm never alone because I always have this other to talk with. The other for him is himself. I think it's the best reading of what Socrates was doing with dialogue. My friend John Peters, very good friend, one of my favorite intellectuals in the world. Um, he has this great book called Speaking into the Air that changed my life 25 years ago. When I read that book, I was like, fuck, it was nuts. But he's got this great riff that dialogue with others is tyrannical, but dialogue with oneself, the very best form. And I think that that could also apply to Lacan's theory of love. The type of love that he's talking about isn't just about giving what you don't have to someone else. We learn how to do that by engaging in the same practice relative to ourselves. And that for me has been a really like sound foundation on which to understand what Lacan is doing. But even as we traipse through all these seminars, is I think the end of psychoanalysis is self-compassion, the
Yeah. And
ability to be with oneself that tills the soil for love of another.
right.
And I think for Lacan, like in terms of like lived experience that is worth having, it's a love of self that translates into a love of another, love with another, as a series of half sayings that never quite overlap. And in psychoanalysis, we learn to be cool with that.
Hmm.
And I see that in you. I see that in this new life that you're building for yourself.
Yeah, and I can't help but to think Lacan's love and interest in the mystics, like the desert mystics, and
You got it,
the
dude.
relationship to jouissance, because it's not about, the religiosity of believing in like a sky daddy and like he's gonna punish you or give you rewards. But if you notice, like that he says that there's an analogy between like analytic intervention and free association with like the spiritual direction, especially with someone like Saint John of the Cross, is like when they pray or when they go out in solitude and they are in tune with themselves, it's about being able to acknowledge the bodily real sensation of being alone and what it means to have a specific thought that generates this feeling in the heart or this feeling in the body when I feel like discontent. And I think in the more secular way, when you're able to love yourself by being alone and also not needing the analyst anymore when you free associate, you're able to tap into that um, thing about like your own enjoyment or what it means to be a speaking body, a speaking
There
being,
you go.
you know?
And you're really the guy to work this out too. Because Lacan sees himself, he's really explicit about this in Seminar 20. He sees himself in that list of mystics. Like there's St. John of the Cross, but he also is like, and then there's Jacques Lacan of Ecrit. He sees himself as doing that work, of experiencing something that cannot pass into language, something that cannot be said. But what you can do is you can show up and be like, listen, motherfucker, I was just out in the desert. And I went through some shit that I really can't describe. Some, but not all of my enjoyment can be talked about here. But I'm telling you, there's this other place where I have learned to enjoy. And it doesn't lend itself to this discussion. And so I think that, the work that you've done spiritually that you continue to do and how it intersects with the work that you do with martial arts, if memory serves, I just see that as this really great potential to remember that when Lacan says encore, more often than not, he thinks of a space between the N and the C. Encore for Lacan is EN space CORPS, meaning in body, in person, being there in analysis, co-presence, all that shit I was talking about. That's what Lacan means by encore. He's very explicit about this at the end of Seminar 19b, leading into 20, where he talks about the mystics. So that little hook that you made, you throw it off as like a passing hook, like where they're out in the desert having these bodily experiences. Don't do that, dude. That's like the bread and butter. That is fundamentally what the not all is. So I think you've got whatever the fish is on that line that you have experientially and spiritually in the work that you're doing, add this to the list of papers that you need to write. Like reel that one in. I would love to see what you come up with. Title
Yeah.
it St. John of the Cross.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah. Thank you again, Sam, for coming on and just having this wonderful back and forth riff and just going on these like insane concepts. And what part of hell do you think we are now, now that we've traversed the Dante's Inferno?
Well, don't forget, the devil's got a backside, but he also got a front side. And you could imagine Lectures on Lacan being the tramp stamp just above Satan's butt crack. But if you really give Dante a read, man, there may be a way to pass through that butt crack and come out on the other side. Now, what's on the front side of the devil, I don't even know. But I guarantee he doesn't enjoy all the women. All right, man.
All right.
Love you, brother. Good to see
All
you.
right. Good to see you.
Yep.
Thank you all. All right.
You good, man.